The wedding chamber had been prepared for a queen. Not a visitor. Not a political bride. A queen. Every candle in the eastern wing of the palace had been lit by hand. Hundreds of them, tall ivory candles in gold holders, short beeswax candles along the windowsills, thin altar candles arranged around the marriage bed in perfect circles, their flames trembling beneath the open arches as the night wind came off the mountains. The bed itself had been dressed in white silk and silver thread. The royal seamstresses had spent 11 days embroidering the Alpha King's crest into the coverlet. A black wolf beneath a crown of thorns. Power wrapped in bloodline. Authority wrapped in tradition. The kind of symbol that made entire packs kneel before a man they had never touched, never questioned, never truly known. Outside the chamber, the kingdom was still celebrating. Music rolled through the courtyard below. Drums. Flutes. The deep, rhythmic chant of noble wolves drunk on wine and the particular joy of victory that arrives when someone else's future is secured. Tonight was supposed to seal the strongest alliance in the Northern Territories. Tonight, Alpha King Cale Draven was supposed to take a bride. Tonight, Elara Ashwood was supposed to become his Luna. But the wedding chamber was empty. Not quiet. Empty. There is a difference. Quiet means someone may return. Empty means someone has already made peace with leaving. Cale stood in the doorway without moving, one hand still resting on the iron handle. For a long moment, no one behind him spoke. Not the guards. Not the servants. Not the priest who had followed him with the marriage blessing still folded between his fingers. No one wanted to be the first person to say what every wolf in that hallway could already smell. She was gone. Not taken. Not dragged. Not wounded. Gone. By choice. The scent trail was too clean for abduction. No panic sweat. No blood. No torn fabric. No signs of struggle. Only lavender. Rainwater. And the faint trace of ashwood smoke that always clung to Elara's skin no matter how often she bathed, as if the forest that raised her had refused to fully release its claim on her. Cale stepped into the room. Slowly. The way a man steps onto a battlefield after the fighting has ended and knows the bodies will not be where he expected them. His boots made no sound on the polished stone floor. He had walked into war councils with less silence than this. He had entered enemy territory with less caution. He had stood before rival alphas, assassins, traitors, and kings who wanted his throat, and never once had his body hesitated at a threshold. But tonight, his own wedding chamber stopped him. Because Elara's bridal veil lay on the floor. Not thrown. Not torn. Folded. Carefully. Deliberately. Placed beside the bed like a final act of respect from a woman who had chosen not to make a scene. That was the first thing that made his chest tighten. The second was the dress. It hung from the back of the carved oak chair near the window. White silk. Pearl beading. Sleeves thin as mist. The gown she had worn only hours ago when she stood beside him before the entire kingdom and promised loyalty before the moon. Not love. Loyalty. Cale remembered that now. The priest had asked her if she would stand beside him through war, famine, rebellion, and death. Elara had looked at him. Not at the priest. Not at the crowd. At him. And she had said, "I will stand where I am valued." The court had laughed softly, thinking it was poetry. Cale had smiled, thinking it was devotion. Now, in the empty chamber, the sentence returned to him with teeth. "I will stand where I am valued." Behind him, one of the younger guards shifted his weight. Cale did not turn. "Leave," he said. One word. Low. Controlled. No roar, no command thundered through the hall, only that single syllable, spoken quietly enough that only wolves could hear the danger contained inside it. The servants fled first. Then the guards. Then the priest, clutching the folded blessing to his chest as if paper could shield him from the humiliation of an abandoned king. The door closed. Cale was alone. That was when he saw the box. It sat in the center of the marriage bed. Small. Dark. Wooden. Not ornate, not royal, not something drawn from the palace treasury or the wedding stores. Old cedar, hand-carved, with scratches along the sides and a brass latch worn smooth from years of use. He knew that box. Elara had kept it in her private study for as long as he could remember. When they were younger, before crowns, before councils, before every conversation between them had become something interrupted by duty, he had once asked her what she kept inside it. She had smiled. Not brightly. Elara rarely smiled brightly. She smiled like a woman who had learned not to give too much of herself away in rooms full of people who took without noticing. "Things I cannot afford to forget," she had said. Cale had assumed she meant memories. Letters from her mother. Childhood keepsakes. Pressed flowers. Private little pieces of a softer life. He had never asked again. Now the box sat on the bed where his bride should have been. And for the first time that night, Alpha King Cale Draven felt something colder than anger move beneath his ribs. Fear. Not the fear of losing control. Not the fear of public shame. Not even the fear of losing her. Something worse. The fear that she had been leaving long before tonight. He crossed the room. The celebration outside struck up another cheer, loud enough to shake the glass in the arched windows. Somewhere below, nobles were raising cups to a marriage that had already become a ghost. The box smelled like Elara. Lavender. Rain. Smoke. And beneath it, something else, ink, old paper, wax. 7 years of silence made material. His fingers closed around the latch. For one absurd second, he almost didn't open it. He told himself it was because a king did not read what was not meant for him. But that was a lie. Cale Draven had broken enemy codes, opened sealed war correspondence, and read death warrants before dawn without a flicker of hesitation. He didn't hesitate because of honor. He hesitated because some animal part of him already knew this box would not accuse him loudly. It would do something worse. It would prove things. He opened it. Inside were letters. Dozens of them. Stacked in careful bundles, tied with black thread, each labeled by year, each sealed in plain cream paper and marked with a date. Not romantic letters. Not love confessions. Reports. Records. Maps folded small. Names. Numbers. Trade routes. Council votes. Medical invoices. Border patrol movements. Emergency grain purchases. The kind of documents that belonged in the royal archive. Or the war room. Cale stared down at them. His mind resisted the shape of what he was seeing. He picked up the first letter. The date on the front was from 7 years ago, the year his father died. The year Cale inherited a crown he had not yet learned how to carry without crushing everything close to him. The wax seal had already been broken. Not tonight. Long ago. As if Elara had written it, sealed it, opened it again, added to it, then sealed it once more. His thumb slid beneath the flap. The paper unfolded with a soft, dry sound. And there, in Elara's neat handwriting, were the first words. "If you're reading this, it means you finally chose your crown over me." Cale stopped breathing. Not because the sentence was dramatic, it was not. That was the terrible part. There was no rage in it. No pleading. No desperate attempt to wound him. It was calm. Measured. Certain. The way Elara spoke when she had already suffered through the worst part privately and was simply informing the world of the conclusion. He read the line again. "If you're reading this, it means you finally chose your crown over me. Finally." That word did not belong to tonight. That word had history inside it. That word had patience inside it. It carried every interrupted dinner, every postponed walk, every council meeting he promised would take only an hour and return from after midnight. Every time she stood beside him in public while he praised generals and advisors and diplomats for victories she had quietly made possible. Every moment he assumed her silence meant agreement. Cale's grip tightened on the paper. A crease formed across the page. He forced his hand to relax. The letter continued. 7 years ago, on the third night after your coronation, Lord Varric advised you to send troops to the western ridge. He told you the Black Fen wolves were gathering for rebellion. They were not. They were burying children who had died from winter fever. Had you marched soldiers into their morning fires, the western packs would have risen against you before your crown was a week old. Cale's eyes moved faster. I rode there myself before dawn. I spoke to their elders. I gave them medicine from my mother's stores and promised them the new king would not mistake grief for treason. They believed me because I did not arrive with a banner. The room seemed to tilt. Cale remembered that week. The reports. Lord Varric entering the council chamber with a strange look on his face, carefully composed, careful in the way he was always careful when something had not gone according to his plan, announcing that the western tension had dissolved before military action became necessary. He remembered being praised for restraint by men who were themselves relieved to avoid a conflict they had been urging. He remembered nodding, accepting the credit, saying nothing because restraint sounded considerably better than admitting he had never made a decision at all. He had thought the crisis simply passed. The way storms passed, the way tensions eventually dissipated when nothing dramatic occurred to escalate them. Natural resolution. The universe restoring its balance. He had not questioned it. Why would he? The Western crisis resolved itself in the same week he was managing 3 other simultaneous problems. He had filed it under things that worked out and moved to the next item. It had not passed. She had carried it. Cale lowered the letter. Outside, the wedding drums continued. Inside, something in him went very still. He reached for another letter. Before Elara Ashwood became the bride who vanished from the Alpha King's wedding chamber, she had been the girl who knew where he hid when the crown became too heavy. Not the council chamber. Not the war room. Not the royal training yard where young wolves broke their knuckles trying to impress commanders who would forget their names by morning. Cale Draven hid in the old Eastern Library. The one no one used anymore because the roof leaked during storms and the shelves smelled of wet parchment, dust, and cedar rot, the kind of room kings forgot existed because nothing inside it could be conquered, taxed, or commanded. When Cale was 16 and not yet king, when his father still ruled with a voice like iron dragged over stone, he would slip into that library after midnight and sit beneath the cracked window with his back against the wall, one knee drawn to his chest, pretending he had gone there to read military history. Elara always knew better. She was 12 the first time she found him there. Small. Quiet. Carrying 2 stolen honey cakes wrapped in a napkin because she had seen him leave dinner without eating. He looked at her as if she had committed treason. She looked back as if she had merely solved a practical problem. You forgot to eat, she said. I did not forget. Then you chose not to. That is different. No, Elara said, placing 1 cake on the floor beside him. That is just forgetting with pride. Cale stared at her for a long moment. Then, against every instinct he had been trained to sharpen into suspicion, he laughed. Not a big laugh. Not loud. But real. And in the palace of Blackthorn, where every smile was weighed for meaning and every word could become a weapon by morning, a real laugh was more dangerous than any blade. That was how they began. Not with a promise. Not with a prophecy. Not with the moon marking them as chosen. With a honey cake placed on a dusty library floor. For years, Elara was the one person in the palace who spoke to Cale as if he were not already becoming a monument. She did not bow when no one was watching. She did not soften her words because he was the crown prince. She did not pretend his silences were wisdom when they were only exhaustion. When he trained too long, she brought water. When he lost control of his wolf during his first full moon shift, she sat outside the iron doors of the containment hall until dawn, listening to the beast inside him tear stone from the walls. When he emerged in human form, shaking, bloodied, ashamed, she did not ask if he was all right. She handed him a cloak and said, "Next time, breathe before the rage takes your spine." Cale had looked at her through the sweat and blood on his face. Is that medical advice? No. That is common sense. You are very bold for someone who cannot shift yet. And you are very dramatic for someone who punched a wall for 6 hours. He should have been offended. He was not. That was the strange thing about Elara. She could say things other people would have been punished for, and from her mouth, they never sounded like disrespect. They sounded like truth. And Cale, who had been raised in rooms where truth arrived disguised as strategy, began to crave it. By the time Elara was 17 and Cale was 21, everyone in the palace knew she was his shadow. Not officially. Officially, she was the orphan daughter of a minor border family that had sworn loyalty to the Draven throne after the Ashwood estate burned during the southern raids. Officially, she had no title worth mentioning. No army. No fortune. No political weight beyond the courtesy the palace extended to useful survivors. But unofficially, she was the person Cale looked for after every council meeting. The person who could read his face when even his commanders could not. The person who knew that when his left hand curled once at his side, he was angry, but when it curled twice, he was afraid. And because no one believed quiet girls could move kingdoms, they allowed her to listen. That was their first mistake. They thought Elara was decoration. A soft presence near the future Alpha King. A calming influence. A childhood attachment that would fade once Cale inherited real power and selected a Luna with better blood, stronger alliances, and a father who controlled soldiers instead of memories. Lord Varric believed that most of all. He had entered Cale's life like smoke through a cracked door, slowly, politely, almost invisibly. A noble advisor from one of the oldest bloodlines in the north, with silver at his temples, perfect posture, and the kind of voice that made poison sound like policy. He never shouted. He never threatened. He never needed to. Varric could destroy a person with a suggestion. At first, he treated Elara kindly. That was how clever men like him worked. They didn't show their teeth until the room had already accepted the smile. Lady Ashwood, he would say, inclining his head just enough to appear respectful and not quite enough to mean it. Still keeping His Highness company? Elara would smile. Someone has to make sure he eats. Varric would laugh softly. A charming duty. Though I imagine, in time, His Highness will require more than charm. Cale never noticed the blade inside the sentence. Elara always did. But in those days, Cale still listened to her more than he listened to Varric. That changed the winter his father died. The old Alpha King did not die peacefully. Men like him rarely did. He died standing in the war room with one hand on a map and the other wrapped around the throat of a messenger who had brought news he disliked. His heart gave out before his temper did. By sunrise, Cale Draven was king. By noon, every noble house in the Northern Territories had sent a representative to Blackthorn Palace. By sunset, 3 border packs had tested his authority. And by midnight, Lord Varric was already standing at his right hand. Not Elara. Varric. That was the first shift. Small enough that no one called it betrayal. Large enough that Elara felt it in her bones. Cale did not stop loving her that day. That would have been simpler. Cruel, perhaps, but clean. No, Cale did something worse. He began to believe love could wait. War could not. Politics could not. Alliances could not. A starving village could not. A border dispute could not. An insult from a rival alpha could not. But Elara? Elara was patient. Elara understood. Elara would be there when the council ended, when the treaties were signed, when the armies returned, when the crown stopped demanding blood from every waking hour. So he let her wait. That belief, quiet, unexamined, never stated aloud, became the most dangerous thing inside his reign. Not because it was malicious. Because it was comfortable. Because it felt generous, even. She was the thing he was protecting by giving everything else his attention. He was working for a future that would eventually include her, and surely she understood that, and surely her patience proved it, and surely the fact that she never complained meant she agreed. He told himself this so often it became indistinguishable from truth. That was how the damage accumulated. Not in single catastrophic moments but in 1,000 small assumptions, each one individually reasonable and collectively ruinous. The assumption that her presence was guaranteed. That her patience was inexhaustible. That silence meant agreement. That love, when real, required no tending. That what she gave him freely she would continue to give regardless of what he gave in return. He was wrong about all of it. But he did not know that yet. At first, it was only one dinner. A private meal arranged in the western garden beneath the winter lanterns. Elara had chosen the place herself because Kale had once told her the garden was the only part of the palace that did not feel built to intimidate people. She waited there for 2 hours. The soup went cold. The lanterns burned low. Snow gathered along the stone railing in soft white layers. When Kale finally arrived, he was still wearing his council coat. His eyes were tired. His jaw was tight. "I am sorry," he said. Elara stood before the servants could see how long she had been sitting alone. "Border trouble." He exhaled. "Blackfen again." "Then eat before you tell me." "I cannot stay." The sentence landed quietly. Not hard. Not yet. Elara looked at him. Kale looked back, already halfway gone in his mind, already standing in another room with maps and men and problems that spoke louder than she did. "Of course," she said. That was the first time. It would not be the last. In the months that followed, Kale became a king in the way men become stone, gradually, under pressure, piece by piece. He learned to sleep for 4 hours and call it discipline. He learned to read betrayal in a nobleman's smile. He learned to send soldiers to die and keep his voice steady while giving the order. He learned to accept applause from people who would have abandoned him if the battle turned. And every lesson took something from him. Softness first. Then patience. Then the ability to sit in silence without reaching for duty like a weapon. Elara watched it happen. Not from a distance, that would have been easier. She watched it from beside him. 3 steps behind his chair in council. Across the table in strategy meetings where she was not invited but somehow always present, pouring wine, delivering sealed notes, correcting maps no one admitted she had corrected. She watched Varric teach him the language of power. Mercy is useful only when witnessed. Affection must never outrank stability. A king cannot afford personal weakness. Love, Your Majesty, is safest when it understands its place. Each sentence was a brick. Each brick became a wall. And because Kale was tired, newly crowned, left with a kingdom full of old fractures and waiting enemies, he let Varric build. Elara tried to speak once. Only once. It was after a council meeting where Varric had convinced Kale to reject a plea from the river villages for tax relief after flooding destroyed half their grain stores. The argument had been clean. Logical. Cold. If the crown made an exception for one region, others would demand the same. If the treasury weakened, the army weakened. If the army weakened, rival packs would sense blood. Kale had approved the denial. That evening, Elara found him alone in the war room. The map table was still covered in markers, red for conflict, black for disputed borders, silver for crown holdings. There were no colors for hungry children. You should reconsider the river tax, she said. Cale did not look up. I cannot. You can. Elara. His voice carried warning. Not anger. Not yet. The kind of warning given by a man who had begun to mistake being challenged for being betrayed. She continued anyway. They lost the lower fields. The reports are incomplete. If you collect full tax now, they will survive the month and collapse by winter. Cale moved a marker from one road to another. Varric says the treasury cannot absorb leniency. Varric has never missed a meal. That made him look up. For a moment, she saw him. Not the king. Cale. The boy from the library with honey-cake crumbs on his sleeve and grief too large for his body. Then the moment passed. His face closed. Do not make this emotional. Elara went very still. Because some sentences don't strike like fists. They enter quietly. They sit down inside you. They wait. I am not making it emotional, she said. I am making it accurate. The council has decided. No. Varric decided. The council agreed because disagreeing with him is inconvenient. Cale's hand curled once at his side. Anger. Not fear. Not yet. You overstep. There it was. The line. Not shouted. Not cruel in the way people recognized cruelty. But final. Elara looked at him for a long moment. Then she bowed. Not deeply. Not like a courtier. Like someone marking the place where something had changed. As you command, Your Majesty. Cale flinched at the title. Just slightly. But he did not call her back. That night, Elara sold the last pieces of her mother's jewelry. She used the money to buy grain through 3 merchant families who owed her favors they did not know they owed, because Elara had once stopped a customs dispute from ruining their trade permits. The grain arrived in the river villages under a false name. No one thanked her. No one knew. 2 weeks later, the council praised Cale because unrest in the river region had mysteriously calmed. Varric called it the natural effect of firm leadership. Cale accepted the praise. Elara stood near the window with her hands folded and said nothing. That became the pattern. A crisis would rise. Cale would face the visible part of it, the reports, the meetings, the public decisions. Then, somewhere beneath the surface, Elara would find the part no one had noticed. A sick child in a village that might become a riot. A forged message planted between rival packs. A widow whose unpaid pension could turn 30 soldiers against the crown. A trade route whose collapse would look like bad weather until the treasury began bleeding silver. She fixed things quietly. Efficiently. Without permission. And because the kingdom did not collapse, everyone assumed Cale was holding it together. Including Cale. Especially Cale. There was the assassination attempt in the 3rd year of his reign. Officially, it never happened. Officially, the visiting envoy from the Southern Vale departed early because of illness. In truth, Elara had noticed that the envoy's personal guard wore leather boots treated with foxglove oil, a substance used to mask the scent of wolfsbane. She said nothing in the hall. She smiled through dinner. She waited until the musicians began playing and the court was too loud to hear footsteps behind the service corridor. Then she followed the guard herself. No weapon. No escort. Only a silver dining knife hidden in her sleeve, because palace women were allowed to carry cutlery where soldiers were not allowed to carry blades. She found the wolfsbane veil tucked behind the chapel altar. Enough to kill Cale if placed in his wine. Enough to make his death look like a seizure triggered by exhaustion. The guard reached for her throat. Elara cut his hand first. Not deeply. Precisely. Between the tendons. He dropped the vial. She caught it before it shattered. The envoy left before dawn with a polite diplomatic excuse and 3 missing guards. Cale was told the Southern Vale had reconsidered its aggressive posture after observing the strength of Blackthorn's security. Varric praised the palace guard. The captain accepted. Cale nodded. Elara stood with a bandage wrapped beneath her sleeve and watched him drink safely from a cup he never knew had almost killed him. Again and again, she stepped into the spaces where disaster began before powerful men could see it. She did not do it because she wanted credit. At first, she did it because she loved him. Then because the people who would suffer were innocent. Then because no one else knew how. That was the dangerous thing about being useful in silence. People begin to mistake your sacrifice for your nature. They stop wondering what it costs. Cale stopped asking why she looked tired. He stopped noticing when she left dinners early. He stopped seeing ink stains on her fingers, mud along the hem of her dress, healing cuts on her palms. He still cared for her. That was the part that made it difficult, the part that made it so easy to avoid calling what he was doing by its proper name. Because neglect committed by someone who loves you does not feel like neglect while it is happening. It feels like the natural order of things. It feels like context. It feels like circumstance. It is only from the outside, or from the vantage point of the person receiving it, that the pattern becomes visible for what it is. He cared in the distracted way a man cares for a fire he assumes will remain lit. He would touch her shoulder as he passed. Kiss her forehead before entering council. Send a servant with tea when he heard she was ill, then forget to visit because an alliance delegation arrived from the north. And Elara, because she had loved him since before the crown had teeth, kept translating neglect into necessity. He is tired. He is king. He is under pressure. He will come back to himself when the kingdom settles. But kingdoms do not settle. There is always another border. Another enemy. Another council vote. Another reason for a woman to wait one more night. Lord Varric understood that before she did. He watched her the way a patient predator watches a door that has not been properly locked. He noticed the reports corrected before they reached Cale. He noticed the sudden disappearance of problems that should have taken weeks to solve. He noticed merchants who bowed lower to Elara than her station required. He noticed soldiers who quieted when she entered infirmaries. He noticed village elders who sent letters addressed not to the crown, but to her. And he hated it. Not loudly. Varric did not hate loudly. He hated with policy. With seating arrangements. With delayed messages. With small humiliations placed carefully enough that Cale would never see them unless he was already looking. He began moving Elara farther from the center. A chair removed from a council chamber. A meeting rescheduled without telling her. A servant instructed to deliver documents to Varric first. A rumor whispered among noblewomen that Lady Ashwood had become too familiar with authority that did not belong to her. Each wound was small. Individually deniable. Together, they formed a cage. One evening during the 5th year of Cale's reign, Elara arrived at the council chamber carrying a sealed report from the western border. The guards did not open the door. She looked at them. They looked at the floor. Lord Varric instructed us that the meeting is restricted, one said. I have the western casualty projections. He said those are to be delivered to him. Elara's fingers tightened around the report. Behind the door, she could hear Cale's voice, low, commanding, familiar. Then Varric's voice. Smooth as polished bone. Your Majesty, the Western issue requires decisive action. Hesitation will be read as weakness. Elara stepped closer to the door. The guard shifted, blocking her. Not aggressively. Worse, apologetically. As if making her small was simply part of the day's work. She could have forced the issue. She could have spoken loudly enough for Cale to hear. She could have reminded everyone in that hallway that half the Western elders trusted her more than they trusted the crown. Instead, she lowered the report. Because she had learned something by then, a woman can be right and still be made to look disruptive if the room has already decided her silence is more convenient. So she turned away. That night, she rode alone to the western border. In the rain. With no escort. She found the elders before Kale's soldiers did. She negotiated through dawn. She gave them terms the crown could survive and dignity they could accept. By the time Kale arrived with troops the next afternoon, the rebellion had become a memorial gathering, weapons buried beneath wet earth, elders kneeling not in defeat but in grief. Kale believed his presence had ended it. Varric told him as much. Elara was standing behind the village healer's hut, soaked through, mud up to her knees, holding a child whose father would not be executed because she had reached the village before the army. Kale did not see her. That was the first time she wondered if love could become invisible through repetition. By the 6th year, the kingdom had begun speaking of the wedding. Not if. When. Kale never formally proposed. Not in the way poets would have described. There was no moonlit garden. No ring hidden in wine. No trembling confession from a man afraid of refusal. There was a council session, a discussion of alliances, a debate about succession stability, and then Kale, tired of noble houses sending daughters like trade offers, said simply, Elara will be my Luna. Not, I choose her. Not, I love her. Not, ask her. Elara will be my Luna. The council erupted. Some in approval. Some in shock. Varric went completely still. Elara, standing near the far wall with a tray of unsigned correspondence in her hands, felt every eye in the room turn toward her. Kale looked at her then, and he smiled. Small. Private, he probably thought. But there was something boyish in it, something almost relieved, as if he had finally solved a problem that had been irritating him too long. Elara smiled back. Because the court was watching. Because refusing him publicly would wound him in a room full of people waiting to measure the blood. Because some part of her, despite everything, still wanted to believe that once the marriage was official, he would remember she was not a piece of policy. The kingdom celebrated. The nobles called it romantic. The servants whispered that Lady Ashwood had waited long enough. Varric called it dangerous, not publicly, never publicly. In private, beside Kale in the war room while Elara's name was added to wedding contracts, he said, a love match is useful for morale, your majesty. But do not allow sentiment to reorganize power. Kale did not answer at first. He was looking at the marriage seal. Black wax. Silver crest. 2 names joined beneath the law. Sentiment did not choose her, Kale said. Varric tilted his head. No. She is loyal. A pause. Small. Deadly. Of course, Varric said. Loyalty is a fine quality in a Luna. So long as it remembers that loyalty serves the crown. It does not guide it. Kale should have corrected him. He did not. And that silence, though no one heard it but Varric, became permission. After the engagement, Elara became more visible and less heard. That was the irony. Her dresses improved. Her rooms were moved closer to the royal wing. Her name appeared in formal announcements. Servants began bowing lower. Noblewomen who had once ignored her now smiled with sharpened sweetness and asked what flowers she preferred for the ceremony. But in council, her voice mattered less than ever. Because now every opinion could be dismissed as emotional. Every warning became bridal anxiety. Every political insight became interference. Every act of competence became preparation for a decorative role. Future Luna. The title sounded like elevation. It felt like burial. Kale did not understand. Or perhaps he did not try hard enough to understand. There were moments when he almost saw it. Late at night, when he came to her study and found candles burned down to stubs, reports spread across every surface, Elara asleep with her head on folded arms and ink smudged along her cheek. He would pause. His face would soften. He would remove the quill from her fingers. Sometimes he would carry her to the couch and cover her with his cloak. Once, just once, she woke as he lifted her. "You came," she whispered. Cale looked down at her. Something moved across his face, guilt, perhaps. Or love. Or the memory of both. "I always come back," he said. Elara was too tired to tell him that coming back was not the same as staying. So she closed her eyes. And let herself believe him for one more night. That was Elara's weakness. Not that she was quiet. Not that she loved too deeply. Her weakness was that she could see the best version of Cale so clearly that she kept forgiving the man in front of her for not yet becoming him. 3 weeks before the wedding, the palace was drowning in celebration. Seamstresses filled the southern halls with white silk. Florists arrived from 4 territories with winter roses packed in ice. The kitchens smelled of roasted meat, sugared almonds, honey wine, and fresh bread. Every corridor carried the frantic beauty of a kingdom preparing to watch its king claim happiness in public. Elara moved through it like a ghost being fitted for a crown. Everyone touched her. Measured her. Praised her. Corrected her posture. Adjusted her sleeves. Told her how lucky she was. No one asked if she was happy. That afternoon, she found Cale in the council chamber. Of course she did. Not the garden, not the chapel, not the room where their wedding vows were being written in gold ink. The council chamber. He stood over the long black table with Lord Varric at his side, 5 maps spread before him, red markers lined along the eastern border, silver markers indicating troop movement. His wedding coat hung untouched on the back of a chair. The final fitting had been scheduled for an hour ago. Varric was speaking. The alliance ceremony must not distract from the eastern pressure. If anything, the wedding gives us leverage. A beloved king appears stable. A stable king can move troops without alarming the council. Cale nodded. Something inside Elara went quiet. Not broken. Not yet. Quiet. Like a room after the last person leaves. "Cale," she said. Varric's eyes found her first. They always did. "Lady Ashwood. We are in the middle of urgent crown business." "I can see that." Cale straightened. "Elara. Is something wrong?" "Almost funny." "Almost." She looked at the maps. At the markers. At the coat he had forgotten. At the advisor who had spent 7 years teaching him that love was safest when it waited outside closed doors. Then she looked at Cale. "No," she said. "I only need to ask you something." Varric sighed softly, just loud enough to be heard. Cale glanced at him, then back to her. "Can it wait?" There it was. The sentence that had followed her through 7 years like a shadow. Can it wait? Dinner could wait. Rest could wait. Pain could wait. Recognition could wait. Love could wait. Elara stepped into the room. No. The word was quiet. But every wolf present heard it. Cale's brows drew together. Varric's expression did not change, but his hand closed around the silver head of his cane. Elara stopped at the edge of the table. She did not look at the other men. Only Cale. "If one day you had to choose between the throne and me," she asked, "what would you choose?" The room became still. Not silent, still. There is a difference. Silence is the absence of sound. Stillness is what happens when every living thing understands that something dangerous has entered the room. Cale looked at her. For one brief second, confusion crossed his face. Not because the question was difficult. Because to him, the answer was obvious. "The throne," he said. Instantly. No hesitation. No pain. No awareness that he had just placed a blade exactly where she had spent years refusing to admit she was wounded. The throne. Elara nodded. Once. A small movement. Almost polite. Behind Kale, Lord Varric lowered his eyes to hide the satisfaction gathering there. Kale saw her smile. That was what he would remember later. The smile. Soft. Composed. Almost tender. He would tell himself for 3 weeks that she had understood. That she had always understood. That Elara, patient Elara, loyal Elara, quiet Elara, knew what it meant to love a king. He did not see what changed behind her eyes. He did not see the final thread loosen. He did not see the girl from the library, the one with honey cakes and fearless truth, step backward into a place he could no longer reach. Elara looked at him for a moment longer. Then she said, "Of course." Not angrily. Not bitterly. That would have warned him. She said it gently. And gentle endings are the ones men like Kale always misunderstand. She turned and left the council chamber. No one stopped her. Not the guards. Not the advisors. Not the king who loved her too carelessly to recognize the sound of losing her. Behind her, Varric resumed speaking about troop placements. Kale looked back down at the map. The meeting continued. The wedding preparations continued. The kingdom continued celebrating. And Elara Ashwood, future Luna of Blackthorn, walked through the palace halls with her head high, her face calm, and her heart finally, quietly, closing. That night, she unlocked the old cedar box in her study. For 7 years she had placed letters inside it. Dates. Records. Proof. Every disaster she had prevented. Every sacrifice no one had seen. Every piece of herself she had surrendered to keep his kingdom standing while he mistook her silence for devotion. She touched the first bundle. Then the second. Then the last. Finally, she took out a blank sheet of cream paper. For a long time, she did not write. She only listened. To the distant sound of soldiers drilling in the yard. To the wedding musicians practicing in the courtyard. To the palace breathing around her like a beast that had eaten too much of her life and still wanted more. Then she dipped her pen in black ink. And wrote the first line of the letter Kale would not read until the night she disappeared. If you're reading this, it means you finally chose your crown over me. The ink dried slowly. Elara folded the page. Sealed it. Placed it on top of the others. And somewhere deep inside the palace, the future began moving toward the wedding night like a blade being drawn from its sheath. The wedding preparations began the next morning. Not quietly. A royal wedding never begins quietly. It announces itself through stone corridors and servant bells, through wagons rolling over palace bridges before dawn, through messengers arriving with sealed lists, through seamstresses carrying bolts of silk like offerings to a god who had never asked whether the sacrifice was willing. White banners were raised along the outer walls. Not the black banners of war. Not the red banners of mourning. White. The color of unions. The color of vows. The color people used when they wanted the world to believe nothing underneath was bleeding. In the great hall, carpenters built the marriage platform from dark cedar and silver ironwood, the same platform where kings had been crowned, treaties signed, and traitors forced to kneel before judgment. Now it would hold flowers. That was the palace's gift. It could dress anything in beauty. Even endings. Elara moved through the preparations with perfect grace. She attended fittings. Approved flowers. Selected music. She sat through lessons with the royal protocol mistress, who explained where a Luna should stand, when she should speak, how low she should incline her head to visiting alphas, and how to smile when older noblewomen insulted her bloodline with compliments. You must never appear offended, the woman said, adjusting the fall of Elara's sleeve. I know. An offended Luna suggests an unstable court. I know. A Luna's dignity belongs first to the crown. Elara looked at herself in the mirror. White silk pinned around her waist. Pearls along her collarbone. Hair braided with silver thread. A woman being prepared for display. Yes, she said softly. That is what everyone keeps telling me. The protocol mistress did not hear the edge beneath the words. Most people did not. They heard Elara's quiet and mistook it for agreement. That was their favorite mistake. Kale was rarely present. When he was, he arrived late and left early, carrying the scent of war rooms and sealing wax. He would step into a fitting chamber where 5 women had spent 4 hours shaping silk around Elara's body, look at her for 3 seconds, and say, "Beautiful." Then a guard would appear in the doorway. A message. A border concern. Lord Varric requesting him. And Kale would kiss Elara's forehead as if affection could be delivered in fragments and still count as presents. "I will return," he would say. Elara would smile. Of course. She never asked when. That was new. Once, she would have asked. Once, she would have teased him, reminded him, pulled him back into himself with a sentence sharp enough to cut through duty. Now she only smiled. And each time she did, something behind her eyes became harder to read. Kale did not notice. Lord Varric did. He noticed everything that could threaten him. He watched her from council doorways, from banquet tables, from behind Kale's right shoulder where he had made himself as permanent as shadow. He noticed that Elara no longer argued. No longer tried to enter meetings from which she had been politely excluded. No longer corrected the reports he altered before they reached the king. And because Varric understood silence better than Kale did, he did not trust it. A silent enemy was dangerous. A silent woman was worse. Especially one who knew where the bodies of old decisions were buried. So he began tightening the palace around her. Not openly, open cruelty creates witnesses. Varric preferred architecture. He changed schedules. Delayed letters. Moved her wedding correspondence through his office under the excuse of royal security. He had her mother's remaining belongings catalogued as crown property because, he said, after the marriage, all personal holdings connected to the Luna would require official record. When Elara heard that, she said nothing. She simply walked to her private rooms after dinner, closed the door, and opened the cedar box. 7 years of proof. Names, dates, receipts. Financial records folded into narrow packets. Maps marked in her own hand. The kingdom believed Kale Draven had ruled with impossible instinct. Elara knew the truth. His instinct had often worn her handwriting. Then Varric made his final move. He advised Kale to sign a Luna authority restriction before the ceremony. A simple document, he called it. Ceremonial. Traditional. A formal clarification that the Luna would have domestic influence, charitable oversight, ceremonial duties, but no independent authority in military, diplomatic, or treasury matters without written approval from the Alpha King or Council. He presented it on a silver tray with other wedding documents. Kale signed 3 before Elara entered the room. She saw the 4th beneath his hand. Her eyes moved once across the page. Domestic influence. Ceremonial duties. No independent authority. Written approval. There are moments when the heart does not break. It simply understands. "Did you read it?" she asked. Kale glanced down, mildly distracted. Varric said it is standard. That is not what I asked. The room cooled. Kale's expression tightened, not because he understood, but because other men were watching him be questioned. Elara. Not now. Not now. Always. Not now. Varric's smile did not move. Elara placed the document back on the tray. Of course. She left before Kale could decide whether to be angry. That afternoon, she began putting her affairs in order. Quietly. Not dramatically. Elara had no interest in performance. She sent her remaining personal coins to the widow's fund in the lower city. She copied the names of honest commanders and placed them in a sealed envelope addressed to Kale's younger cousin, the only Draven with enough conscience to use them if the palace began to rot openly. She burned letters that could endanger villagers who had helped her. She packed 2 dresses, 1 cloak, 3 knives, a pouch of medicinal herbs, and a small portrait of Kale at 17 that she stared at for a very long time before placing it face down in a drawer. Then she returned to the cedar box. One by one, she added the final pieces. Not enough for the court to understand, the court did not deserve the whole truth. Enough for Kale. If he chose to look. A map of Blackfen, marked with the path she rode the night she prevented his first war. The broken wolfsbane vial from the southern feast. The receipt for the grain bought with his mother's emerald necklace. The false execution order for the 3 scouts. The altered council transcript with Varric's correction marks hidden beneath the official ink. The Luna authority restriction, unsigned by her, folded neatly at the bottom. Each item was a wound. Each letter was a bone pulled from the body of their history and laid where he would finally have to count them. The closer the wedding came, the brighter the palace became. That was the cruel part. The world did not darken to match her. It bloomed. Noble families arrived in carriages painted with house crests. The northern alphas came with wolf guards and tribute chests. Children from the lower city were brought to scatter petals along the wedding road. People cheered when she passed. Future Luna. Lady Elara. Our queen. She smiled at them all. Because they were not her enemy. They believed in a story the palace had written for them, a patient woman rewarded, a powerful king softened by love, a kingdom united under moon-blessed vows. It was a beautiful story. That was why it hurt. The night before the wedding, Kale came to her rooms. For once, he came without guards. Without Varric. Without a report in his hand. Elara opened the door and found him standing there in a simple black shirt, his crown absent, his hair damp from rain. For a second, she saw the boy from the library again. And that almost ruined everything. "May I come in?" he asked. She stepped aside. He entered slowly, looking around as if realizing he had not truly been inside her rooms in months. Not really. He had passed through. Dropped kisses. Left messages. But he had not stood there long enough to notice the empty shelves. The missing books. The drawers already cleaned out. The cedar box resting near the bed. His eyes touched it. Then moved away. He did not ask. "Elara," he said. Her name sounded different in his mouth that night. Less like habit. More like need. She turned toward him. "Yes." He looked at her for a long moment. "I know I have been absent." The words were careful. Prepared, perhaps. But not false. "I know the wedding has asked much of you." Elara waited. Kale inhaled. "After tomorrow, things will settle." There it was. The promise that had kept her trapped for years. After this crisis. After this war. After this treaty. After this council. After tomorrow. Things will settle. "No," she said softly. "They won't." Kale frowned. "They will." "You believe that?" "I know it." "No, Kale. You know war. You know strategy. You know how to survive pressure. But you do not know how to stop feeding everything you love to the thing you fear losing." His face changed. Just slightly. A flicker of pain. Then defense. "Elara." She lifted a hand. Not to silence him harshly. To spare herself. "Not tonight." He stepped closer. "I love you." The words entered the room like something late to its own funeral. Elara closed her eyes. For years, she had wanted those words. Needed them. Imagined they would repair something. But now, hearing them, she understood the terrible truth. Love could be real and still not be enough. I know, she said. Cale looked almost relieved. That hurt more. He touched her cheek. She let him. His thumb moved along her skin with familiar tenderness, and her body remembered every version of him she had ever loved. The boy. The prince. The grieving son. The young king who used to come to her door bleeding and sit on the floor because the bed felt too soft for the guilt he carried. She loved all of them. That was the problem. She loved men who existed mostly in memory. Cale leaned down and kissed her forehead. Tomorrow, he whispered. Elara kept her eyes closed. Yes, she said. Tomorrow. He left believing they had found peace. After the door closed, Elara stood alone in the center of her room until the candle flames burned low. Then she opened the cedar box one final time and placed the last letter on top, the one addressed not to the king, not to your majesty, but to Cale. The man she had waited for. The man who had never fully arrived. Outside, the palace bells began the midnight count. 12 slow strikes. Each one moving her closer to the altar. Each one moving him closer to the truth. On the wedding morning, Elara dressed in white. The gown fit perfectly. Of course it did. The seamstresses had measured every inch of her body. No one had measured the cost. Her hair was braided with silver thread and winter pearls. A veil fell over her face like mist. The palace women wept when they saw her. You look like a queen, one whispered. Elara looked at herself in the mirror. No, she said softly. But no one heard her. The ceremony began at dusk. The great hall was packed. Nobles, alphas, commanders, merchants, village elders, foreign envoys, every category of the kingdom's powerful present, arrayed in their finest, waiting to witness history. Torches burned along the walls. The black wolf banners hung behind the altar. Winter roses covered the steps so thickly that their scent nearly drowned out the smell of hundreds of wolves pressed together in shared expectation. Cale stood at the front. Tall. Powerful. Beautiful in the way dangerous men become beautiful when everyone agrees to call danger strength. When Elara entered, the hall rose. All of them. Every noble who had dismissed her. Every advisor who had interrupted her. Every soldier whose life she had once saved without their knowledge. Every villager who loved a king because they did not know she had been the hand behind his mercy. They stood. And Cale looked at her. For once, fully. His face softened in a way that made 1,000 people sigh. Elara walked toward him. Step by step. The aisle felt longer than it should have. At the front, Lord Varric watched from Cale's right side. Calm. Satisfied. He believed the ceremony was the final lock on the cage. Elara looked at him once. Only once. Then she looked away. The priest began. Old words. Moon words. Bloodline words. Words about union, duty, loyalty, crown, sacrifice. Always sacrifice. When the time came, Cale took her hands. His palms were warm. Hers were steady. The priest asked him if he would protect her as Luna, honor her as mate, and place her beside him before the eyes of the moon. I will, Cale said. The hall approved. Then the priest turned to Elara. Lady Elara Ashwood, do you swear to stand beside Alpha King Cale Draven through war, famine, rebellion, and death? Elara looked at Cale. Not the priest. Not the court. Cale. For one heartbeat, something passed between them. A question. A warning. A farewell. I will stand, she said, where I am valued. A soft ripple moved through the hall. Some smiled. Some nodded. Someone whispered that it was beautiful. Cale smiled too. Because he did not understand. The ceremony completed. The vows were spoken. The ceremonial blade touched both their palms, and their blood marked the silver basin. The hall erupted, cheers, drums, howls, the sound of a kingdom celebrating what it believed was a beginning. Cale drew Elara close. His hand tightened at her waist. His eyes searched hers. Mine, he whispered. The word was not cruel. That was why it cut. Elara reached up and touched his face. Gently. So gently that later, when he replayed it, he would understand that tenderness had been her final mercy. Then she kissed him, not like a woman pretending, not like a woman who felt nothing. She kissed him with 7 years of love, 7 years of grief, 7 years of waiting, and one final goodbye hidden beneath the softness of her mouth. When she pulled away, Cale looked unsteady. The court roared. Varric smiled. The drums began again. For hours, Elara played her role perfectly. She danced once with Cale. Accepted blessings. Laughed at noblewomen's delicate jokes. Held a child from the lower city who had fallen asleep against her shoulder. Thanked the musicians. Even on the night she planned to leave, she was still preventing small disasters. That was who she was. At 11 minutes before midnight, she stood. No one noticed at first. Cale was trapped in conversation with 3 northern alphas and Lord Varric, who had angled his body just enough to keep the king's attention away from the hall. Elara looked back once. Cale laughed at something one of the alphas said. Not loudly. Not freely. But enough. Enough to prove he was not watching. She turned. Walked through the side arch down the moon corridor. Past the chapel. Past the portraits of Draven queens whose painted eyes seemed to ask what she had given up to remain here. In the bridal chamber, the candles were already lit. The bed prepared. The white silk waiting. Elara removed her veil first. Folded it. Placed it on the floor beside the bed. Then the crown combs. The earrings. The pearl pins. Piece by piece, she took off the symbols of a life that had never asked whether she wanted to wear them. She changed into a plain dark traveling dress. Pulled a hooded cloak over her shoulders. Tied a knife to her thigh. Then she lifted the cedar box with both hands and placed it in the center of the marriage bed. For a moment, she rested her palm on the lid. Goodbye, Cale, she whispered. No one answered. That was fitting. She had spent years speaking into rooms where no one answered the thing she was truly saying. At midnight, the palace bells began to ring. At the feast, everyone cheered. At the marriage bed, the cedar box waited. And by the time Alpha King Cale Draven finally came looking for his bride, Elara Ashwood was already beyond the palace walls. No blood. No struggle. No abduction. Only lavender. Rainwater. Ashwood smoke. And 7 years of truth waiting to be opened. Back in the empty wedding chamber, the letters continued to destroy him. He opened the one dated 6 years ago. The winter famine. The eastern villages. The eastern villages did not survive that winter because the treasury released grain. The treasury refused 3 times. I sold the emerald necklace your mother gave me and used the money to buy grain through merchant channels under a false name. If anyone asks, the crown saved them. It is better that they believe in you. Cale's jaw locked. He remembered that necklace. Green stones against Elara's throat. His mother had given it to her at the first royal solstice feast, back when the old queen still believed Cale was capable of becoming a husband before he became a monument. One spring, the necklace disappeared. Cale had asked about it once. Elara had said, I found a better use for it. He had thought she meant fashion. He had thought. He closed his eyes. Then he opened the third letter. And the fourth. And the fifth. Assassination attempts redirected. Council betrayals uncovered. Pact disputes settled before reaching his desk. Villages funded. Widows protected. Trade contracts corrected. Prisoners spared because Alara had discovered the evidence against them was forged. Every victory he thought had come from stability. Every calm season he believed proved his strength. Every year he assumed his kingdom had obeyed because he ruled well. There she was. In the margins. In the shadows. In the places no one applauded. The woman who walked 3 steps behind him in court had been standing 3 steps ahead of every disaster. A sound left his throat. Not a growl. Not a word. Something too quiet to be anger and too broken to be command. He reached blindly into the box and pulled out another bundle. This one was not tied in black thread. It was tied in white. The same white as her wedding dress. On top lay a note. Read these only if you still do not understand why I left. Cale stared at the words. His pulse moved once. Hard. The palace suddenly felt too large around him. Too full of people celebrating a lie. He opened the first white-tied letter. The date was from 3 weeks before the wedding. The night Alara had asked him the question. If one day you had to choose between the throne and me, what would you choose? He had answered without thinking. The throne. Because he was king. Because duty came first. Because that was what his father had beaten into him until the lesson became indistinguishable from survival. He had said it as if it were obvious. He had not noticed the way her smile faded. He had not noticed how still she became. He had not understood that a woman does not always leave when her body walks out the door. Sometimes she leaves in the space after an answer. Sometimes she leaves while still standing in front of you. He unfolded the letter. If this is the letter you are holding, then the wedding has happened, or almost happened, and I have done what I should have done years ago. His fingers tightened. I am not leaving because I stopped loving you. That would have been easier. I am leaving because loving you became a room where only one of us was allowed to need anything. Cale sat down on the edge of the bed. The silk coverlet shifted beneath him. The crown of thorns stitched into the bedding caught the candlelight. I waited for you through wars. Through council betrayals. Through winters when you came to my door only because everyone else was asleep and you needed somewhere quiet to bleed. I never asked you to be less than king. I only asked you to remember that I was not part of the furniture of your life. His throat worked. No sound came out. I know what they will say tonight. They will say I was ungrateful. They will say I was frightened of becoming Luna. They will say I shamed you. Let them. I have carried worse things than their opinions. He could see her then. Not the bride in white. Not the quiet woman beside him at court. The girl from 7 years ago, standing in the rain outside the training yard, holding bandages in one hand and a political report in the other because even then she had understood that kings bled in more than one way. He had loved her. That thought came suddenly. Violently. Not as comfort. As accusation. He had loved her the way selfish men love fire. For warmth. For light. For what it gave him. Without once asking what it consumed. The final line of the letter waited at the bottom of the page. I did not run from the wedding, Cale. I ran from the life that would have buried me inside it. The candle beside the bed guttered. Wax spilled down the holder like a tear. Cale sat in the empty wedding chamber with his bride's letters spread around him like evidence at a trial. And for the first time in his reign, the Alpha King understood that silence had a sound. It was the sound of every question he never asked. Every wound he never noticed. Every sacrifice he accepted because it arrived quietly enough to mistake for loyalty. Then he saw the second white letter. It had no date. Only 4 words written across the front. The child was yours. Cale's blood turned cold. The celebration outside vanished. The music. The voices. The kingdom. All of it dropped away until there was only the letter in his hand and the sudden, brutal awareness that whatever Alara had left behind was not finished destroying him. He opened it. And by the time he reached the first line, Alpha King Kale Draven realized the woman he was about to marry had not simply left him. She had left him with the truth. And the truth had only just begun.